when you don't have any money or funding, like you just kind of like have to do whatever to move the ball forward.
Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses, and each week I talk with Olympians, pro athletes, TV stars, Grammy winners, best-selling authors, CEOs, and other high performers to uncover their success secrets. Every conversation is jam-packed with inspiration and actionable ideas we all can apply to our own lives, personally and professionally. Get ready for a behind-the-scenes look at the techniques, processes, and mindsets powering the world's most successful people. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. This week, my guest is the Gist co-founder, Jacie deHoop. Jacie is an entrepreneur, business leader, a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, and she has been recognized by Sports Business Journal as a power player in sports. In 2017, Jacie and a couple of friends were hanging out and chatting over takeout food when they came up with an idea for a business. From there, they met nearly every Sunday for the next 8 months to shape the concept, develop the business case, and officially launch The Gist. The Gist's initial product, a weekly email newsletter devoted to equal coverage of women's and men's sports. And like so many entrepreneurs, Jacie and her co-founders are scrappy. They worked tirelessly to get the ball rolling in the early days. They began asking colleagues, friends, and family to sign up for The Gist, and even asked random people in the park for their email address to grow their subscriber base in the early days. Today, The Gist is a massive fan-first sports media brand that's shaking up the male-dominated sports industry. The Gist is totally reinventing the dialogue around sports by providing equal coverage to women's and men's sports through its newsletters, podcasts, social media content, and more. And last fall, The Gist surpassed 1 million email newsletter subscribers. They have engagement that doubles the industry average, and the company has grown revenue by more than 20 times over the past 2 years through collaborations with Nike, Netflix, and the NBA. Well, how do they do it? I recently sat down with Jacie to talk about it all. We explored her career and journey building The Gist. Our conversation is about turning an idea into action, building something from the ground up, overcoming doubt, and so much more. Jacie shared so many powerful ideas that we all can apply to our own lives, both personally and professionally. And I hope you take away as much from this conversation as I have. Oh, and one more thing. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for the advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to Jacie deHoop. I am always curious to ask entrepreneurs, is building a business and being an entrepreneur something that you always aspired to?
I would say in some ways, yes. I think that, running my own business has always been something that I thought would be, it's kind of like a dream to be able to be in that position. I think whether that's a small business, a startup, like in various fields, I wasn't really sure of, but I would say it's something that had always kind of been in the back of my head. I also went to business school. And so I think that that kind of background and just being around other people in that space fuels a lot of that too. But I was certainly naive as well as to what that would actually kind of entail. And honestly, I think that I'd pictured myself being more of an entrepreneur, business owner later in life and later in my career, as opposed to, for myself, it was more like kind of mid-20s was when we started The Gist. But I will say it's something that I've always been interested in doing for sure.
Was entrepreneurship something that had kind of run in your blood? Were family members or friends growing up, were you around entrepreneurs and business leaders?
No, not at all. Not even a little bit. My family all comes from more of the public sector. Yeah, very, very public sector focused. I think when I went to business school, they were very surprised. But I think there's an interesting parallel between sports and business. And I think with starting one's business, and I think that the thrill and the ups and downs of sports and athletics really translates to entrepreneurship and more of the business world. And so it was just something that I was definitely interested in. And I think that a lot of it was fueled from being, yeah, again, in a business program and just around other like-minded people. And that's also where I met my co-founders. And so I think that's where some of that was fueled. But no, I didn't really have family members or family friends per se that were kind of role models in that sphere. I think actually a lot of what led to us starting the Gist fairly early in our careers was actually kind of being on the other end of that spectrum in like a very, very corporate, really big companies is actually where I started off. And it was kind of like, that's when you realize that the opposite of that kind of environment might be a better fit for you kind of thing too. So I would say it was kind of like in that phase of life where just even the thought of like starting one's own business like actually was something that I started working towards or thinking about.
Was that something that was kind of constantly tugging at you while you were in that big corporate setting? Was like there might be something else out there for me, or this isn't a great fit. Like, do you feel like when the idea for the Gist came about, were you running to something that was really, really interesting, or were you more so running away from something that you had kind of identified, hey, I don't really like what I'm doing now, so I'll try something else?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say so right out of school, I started working in actually it was the oldest company in the world, the Hudson's Bay Company, which unfortunately now is going through a lot of issues. But yeah, I was interested in the space. I was doing kind of one of those rotational executive trainee programs where you get to see all different areas of the business. Huge company, again, very old company. And I was right out of school and was really excited for what that could be and how my career could kind of take off from there. But it was very clear to me very early on in being there that it just wasn't going to be a fit. I think that the intricacies and hierarchy and processes of being in a really, really large company, I just could tell it wasn't the right fit for me. And so actually, I went from kind of like, yeah, massive corporation, really, really old organization to a management consulting firm where I also wanted to, again, early in my career, just like work for a lot of different clients and have a little bit more breadth and get a sense for what I was really good at and what kind of environment I could thrive in. But I went to a smaller consulting shop too, because I could, again, I think that I actually knew very early on that that big company kind of corporate environment wasn't going to be the best fit for me, at least at that point in my career, very early in my career. And then it was from that consulting firm was when we started the Gist specifically. And I would say the Gist and being a like really scrappy media startup is probably the exact opposite
Sure
of
is.
being
Yeah.
at the oldest company in the world. So it's been interesting seeing kind of that progression for me over the last few years. But I certainly think making that first move to the consulting world was needing to have a change in environment for sure. And just knowing that just kind of like the way that I like to work and what gets me really excited wasn't going to be a fit in that kind of space. Versus when we quit our jobs to start the Gist, it was because we saw a huge opportunity. So I wouldn't say that that was because I was so like wanting to start my own business. It was because of the concept specifically that we saw a huge business opportunity in and just really felt and had a lot of conviction around just this concept that there were just so many fans out there that could be these amazing sports fans, but that have felt really underserved. I think that was always that kind of like core pain point for why we started the Gist. And so that kind of transition from being in a relatively kind of like cushy, still pretty corporate job in the management consulting kind of finance world. I was working with for really a bunch of different banks at the time, but left that really because we were like, there's something here. This could be something really huge and just really wanted to jump at it.
So take me back then to that moment in 2017. Is it like this immediate, like eureka aha moment where you're like, this is what the Gist should be? This is the opportunity that you kind of just alluded to there? Or did it take some time for you and the other co-founders to kind of piece this together? Take me back to that moment where you really started to develop this idea initially.
Yeah, you know what? It came about pretty organically and pretty quickly, all things considered. So my two other co-founders were friends of mine from school, from university. And we were all kind of working in similar environments. Again, like very corporate, all kind of in and around financial services. I mentioned that my clients were all the big banks, very male dominated spaces as well. All three of us also played sports and just like loved sports in different capacities. And I think, but being in that kind of corporate environment and being around, honestly, a lot of guys talking about sports all the time, especially when you're in that kind of client facing role, you saw how, as a female fan and just as a woman, it's really easy to feel on the outside of that sports conversation, on the outside of that sports community, which was kind of strange for me because I think, yeah, I've always loved sports, whether that's playing or being a fan. And yet it's really easy, again, to be kind of excluded from that or on the outside of that. And we were also noticing how it's like not as common. This was back in 2017 when we came up with the idea for just women to connect with one another over sports. And isn't that one of the best things in life is when you're catching up with your friend or you're like really getting into it with your friend over sports. Like it's such an amazing passion point. And yet we were finding, with our friends and each other and our colleagues, it's like not that same passion point for women a lot of the time. And so honestly, the idea came up. It was like a Tuesday night takeout just like really a random Tuesday night when we came up with the idea. And the premise was always that we want to be giving your sports updates from your like sports obsessed, witty best friend. And it was really modeled after my co-founder, Elle. She's the one that's like avid sports fan. She knows everything going on in sports, men's, women's, just like her. She has like an amazing passion for sports across the board. And it was really modeled after how it's like really fun to talk with Elle about sports. Like I loved it. It's just something that you can really feel that passion and it's like a very infectious energy. And it's like so much more interesting than when you're watching a broadcast or talking with just like other guys about sports, honestly. But honestly, there was that very first night that we also were like, and we could do so through a newsletter. We were all subscribers of The Skim at the time. And I think a few others, maybe like, I don't know if we were already subscribed to The Hustle or a Morning Brew and what have you, but we were all corporate girls who were like spending tons of time in our inboxes. And we kind of saw how the newsletter is a really powerful way to kind of have that purposeful read and grant access to one's inbox. And so it was actually like the very first night when we came up with the concept for the gist, we were like, so many women could be interested in this. It could be a newsletter. We would make money through partnerships. And we always were, this is a business opportunity. It was never going to be a project or a nonprofit or a cause or anything like that. It was always that we saw a business opportunity and thought that there's like this just huge underserved fan base that's waiting to be nurtured and created content for. And yeah, the newsletter, like again, we came up with that the first night. Also that we would have equal coverage of women's and men's sports. We came up with that first night. And then another piece was that we really wanted to center female voices and perspectives in sports. And so just having, a female content team and again, always feeling like you're getting your sports updates from your bestie kind of thing was always like the tone and voice that we wanted to create. So we actually came up with it like very organically and kind of were off to the races that night. And we're like getting all excited and putting everything into a Google Doc. I would say though, in talking with folks, like I think everyone comes up with amazing ideas all the time. I think the difference in us actually getting from that night to having a launch party, which would have been maybe like 8 months later, was that like after the next morning, we all text each other. We were like, that was kind of a fun idea. Are we actually interested? And sometimes there's a little bit of groupthink too. It's like one person's like, yeah, I'm all in. And then everybody else is like, yeah, me too. But we actually met almost every Sunday for the next 8 months to build out more of the content and what it could be and like the business case for it. And I think that there's something around like us taking time out of our very busy personal lives every weekend to actually carve it out that showed each other that we were committed to it. And I think that's why the gist exists today, is because in that very first kind of like 6 months of coming up with the concept, we actually followed up and actually built on it and showed each other that we were showing up each week.
I'm so glad you added that, Jacie, because as you put it, I mean, ideas are everywhere. And, I always say like ideas are cheap, right? Ideas are sometimes the easy part to come up with. It's the follow-up and the follow-through. I think the other thing that's important to note here, and I want to explore, is people listening, and we know, all of us who are fans of women's sports, know that women's sports has come a long way, but there's still a long way to go in terms of building the businesses around women's sports and getting the attention that should be on women's sports globally. But with everything that's happened, in particular the last couple of years, people may take this for granted, right? But 2017, this was before Caitlin Clark. This was before the TikTok, around the women's March Madness in the NCAA tournament, where they showed the locker room, and then everything changed there, where a lot of women's sports were on that, where they weren't on national TV as much as they are now. Take me back to that moment, because something that now might seem like a little easier to kind of push the ball up the hill, I would imagine back in 2017, I mean, you must have been getting a lot of pushback from people who said, people are not going to be interested in this. This is not going to be enough of a target addressable market. Take me back to that moment. Did you get pushback like that?
Oh my gosh, we got so much of that feedback. So much. Absolutely. It was a really, really different time. I think that today it feels like, of course, there's a huge business opportunity in women's sports. And for us too, it's really been around centering female fans and really growing the entire sports ecosystem through women. So that's from a fan perspective, that's from a women's sports and female athletes perspective. That's also in having more women working in sports, whether that's in the front office and making decisions around sports, also from a media perspective, more journalists and content creators who are women, and really just wanting to diversify this space overall, and women's sports being a huge, huge part of needing to do that. And that was not part of the cultural lexicon at that time. I think today it's again, of course, there's a huge opportunity there, but we got tons of feedback from a lot of potential investors, from a lot of sports media executives too, whether in the US, in Canada. We talked with several different really important people. We talked with a lot of properties and ownership groups, because we also did do some fundraising. We needed to have some capital to get kind of things going in those early days. And a lot of people really, again, I always say, we, from day one, that just was going to be a business, and we saw a huge business opportunity. But the number of people that would assume that we were starting a nonprofit, or that it was essentially a project and kind of like a side hobby, and didn't see the actual addressable market and kind of what this could become, was really, really interesting. I think that was really hard too. We were really, and we still are, but we're, really young women we're talking with. And we came from a finance background, more of that business background, didn't come from a media, journalism, or sports world. And we were hearing from all these super experienced execs that have a lot of authority in the space that women just don't love sports. That's what we heard. We heard there just really isn't that much of a marketable opportunity around women's sports and around female athletes. We got tons of that feedback. And I think in hindsight, we had a lot of conviction around our initial idea. And I think you have to be almost delusional on having conviction around that. I think we tried to be incredibly open to all kinds of feedback. We took every single call. We talked with as many people as we could who had more experience in different spaces. But I think it honestly probably took a few years before I was able to realize that, we're getting all of this feedback and I'm taking that in as a data point, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the path that we're going to go down. But it was very difficult because everyone had an opinion of what the Gist could become and what it should become. And I think, again, having that real belief in the initial concept and our overall thesis of what this space could be is, again, has been so foundational to us being where we are today. Because today it's more true than ever that the initial pain point that we were out to solve is that is really what the Gist is doing today. But if we'd listened to a lot of the feedback from way smarter, more experienced folks, that might not have happened. So I think it's been a journey for sure on kind of, listening and being open to all kinds of feedback and taking all of those calls and having those conversations while also staying true to yourself and really what you believe in and where you see the space going.
What's something specific that you would recommend somebody who's listening do when they have that conviction? It could be anything. It could be starting a business. It could be chasing, whatever dream or idea that they have. And they start to hear that outside noise. The doubt starts to creep into their mind. What's one thing or two things that you would recommend people do to stay delusional, as you put it, and focus on the prize at hand? Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because on the flip side, I also think that it is so, so valuable to talk to as many people about your concept and get that feedback as possible. Like, I think you do see instances where there should be more adjustments and pivoting and what have you. And if you don't have that openness, and I think can often have, it's like finding that right line between being delusional, but also having too much ego and also recognizing when, okay, we should be adjusting. And I think that honestly has taken me years and I'm still working on like, what is that right line where it's like, no, we're going to stick to what we thought we were going to do versus making some of those adjustments. I think a big thing for me has been, and I've been really, really blessed to have co-founders. And so I think there have been moments when, you get out of an investor meeting and we got all this feedback on like how the gist is never going to make any money and what have you. And then when you're kind of questioning everything, I think having a partner that is interpreting that feedback totally differently or is still sometimes delusional, but sometimes also is still feeling conviction. I think that using each other's energy and different levels of motivation at different times is so important. And that doesn't need to be a co-founder, but having people in your life and a support system where you can also talk through those moments, I think is really, really important. I also think, like I was mentioning, it's important not to surround yourself with just yes people that are like every single thing that you do and think of is amazing and is going to be this huge opportunity. I think it's really important to have the right supports around you where like, that is really interesting what they brought up and maybe you should be taking it really seriously and into consideration. I think that finding those people and having that kind of ecosystem around you of people that you trust is really important.
Do you have people outside of this industry that you continue to seek out for input and perspectives? Because that's something that I've always found throughout my career is that having perspectives from a lot of different people in your ecosystem, but then also outside can be very revitalizing.
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree. I think we've built a lot of advisors in this space that have grown businesses similar to ours. And those are so, so helpful. But it's so helpful sometimes talking with somebody that has absolutely no clue about like the actual day to day and the nuances of your industry. I think for me, particularly on more of the like people and culture and leadership side, I think having advisors, friends, we've worked with an executive coach over time too, that has nothing to do with media or sports, but that can kind of like allow you to zoom out of your day to day and current kind of experience is so helpful. So yeah, I agree. I think having some of that expertise outside of your industry has been really, really valuable.
All right, everyone. We'll get back to the conversation momentarily. But first, I want to tell you about my free weekly email newsletter, Tarp Pullers. Each week, I share an uplifting and inspirational tarp pulling story that is sure to brighten your day. And I also highlight some of the most powerful ideas I've learned on my journey talking to 200 and counting of the world's top performers. The newsletter is short, concise, and a reader recently told me this. She said it makes her day every time it hits her inbox. Go to everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter to sign up today. What about taking something that is really initially small and very personal to a small group of co-founders and scaling it? I mean, you talked a little bit ago about wanting to have that witty kind of conversational voice in everything that the Gist was doing. But I would imagine maintaining a voice is a lot harder when you start to add employees and the team starts to grow and things get more complex. Talk about that. How hard has it been to maintain that consistency, that voice as the through line, from the days the business was started in 2017, 2018 to now when it's obviously a much, much larger enterprise?
Yeah. There have been so many challenges and learnings with scaling everything that we were doing. I think when we started off, we were very much so kind of like Toronto, local, very small, very scrappy. Like we were getting people to sign up for the newsletter by like going to the park and being like, "Will can we get your email if we give you a pack of gum?" Like we were like very scrappy grassroots kind of in our early days, and then kind of having that vision in mind of what the gist can become and taking tiny steps every day to getting to that place, I think has been foundational to the growth, but like kind of like in some ways staying true to our roots and being a little bit more. Yeah, there were just like some really core things from our early days, such as the voice and the tone that have certainly been a process in scaling and having, you know, we now have a huge content team. And now, I used to do all of our sales calls and every single one of our proposals and, also wanted to and was very, I think for myself and my co-founders, we were in some ways like very protective as well over the product and what our consumers and users and gisters, but also these brand partners were going to see and finding that balance of really scaling that impact to other people has definitely been an exercise in training and coaching and a really huge leadership kind of development opportunity for us. But it's not been without its challenges. Like I think that's something that, yeah, you don't really see like the actual day to day of what scaling something beyond like looks like. I think it's a little bit more of the unglamorous side of having a business is some of those like day to day small decisions that allow you to execute on that larger vision and scale something like our voice. But we've been working on it. And it's a very fine balance of like, where does it make sense for you to continue owning something versus when does it make sense to really coach up and enable others to do it so much better than you can too. I think that's been a really great experience is bringing on team members who are so good at certain aspects and can really level up everything that we were doing. I think as a founder, you have to be such a generalist. Like you kind of just have to do everything. And there are a lot of things I was like, I should not be doing that. I'm so bad at doing that. And so it's been also really gratifying, I think, to have others come in and take the voice and make it their own in a lot of ways too, and have their own unique kind of approach to our content, again, to our sales calls or proposals or what have you. But it's definitely been with its challenges too.
Well, I love those stories of scrappiness. I'm just smiling ear to ear at that story about you all standing in the park with the, handing out gum in exchange for, signing up for newsletters. This podcast is called Everybody Pulls the Tarp. It all ties back to an internship I had over 20 years ago working in minor league baseball, where I pulled the tarp with the grounds crew. I dressed as the mascot. I drove players to the airport. I cleaned up fireworks debris in center field. I inflated the moon bounces. I did all these little things that I wasn't expecting, but they were all critically important to getting the job done. And I love finding and uncovering stories like that, where people who are building something really, really special are just willing to do whatever it takes to move the ball forward a little bit. Any other examples? I'm sure there are, just like that, standing in the park, signing people up for newsletter to get newsletter subscribers. Other examples of scrappiness that you remember that you kind of look back on and you just smile and you say, oh, I can't believe we did that, or I can't believe we had to do that to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, totally. There's so many. Oh my gosh. We were there's just the realities, I think, of when you don't have any money or funding, like you just kind of like have to do whatever to move the ball forward. I love that analogy where it's like you're like, all right, well, there's no other option. So I guess this is what we'll do. We did, yeah, I think for in our first year, especially, we just needed to gain subscribers. Like we just needed to get the base to a certain level so we could even get feedback from our gisters and really tweak the content and make sure that it was really landing with an audience. And so every day I would wake up and think like, how do we get more people to sign up? And so when you forced every single person in your office and every personal connection, then you're like, okay, we got to start getting a little bit more scrappy. Yeah. The handing out gum in the park was an interesting one. Not, I wouldn't say super effective. Most people were weirded out that we were like trying to get their email kind of thing. But we spent some time down in Philly. We were part of a Comcast NBC accelerator program with Techstars. We went to a Eagles tailgate, and like everyone's partying and we're trying to get their emails. Like every group of girls, we're going up to all these girls in the bathroom line for the porta potties, and they're like, "Have you heard of the gist?" Everyone's like, "No." and we're trying to get them to sign up. So there was a lot of just like those kind of guerrilla moments. We one time we did like a campus tour, drove to 3 or 4 different college campuses and printed out like thousands of cards and dropped them in like cafeterias at all of these different campuses and just dropped them all over campus. And it was like a scavenger hunt. It was like, and this was even QR codes weren't even a thing. It was like, go to this link and then answer this question and da da da. It was a whole thing, but we were very scrappy in our early days. We were doing anything to get emails. Like I would meet somebody at a party and be like, put in your email for the Gist newsletter. It was very interesting. But you know what? I will say it's so hard. Like you look back and you're like, we couldn't even track attribution. I have no clue if any of that signed up. Like doing that whole college campus tour, we're like, we got 100 people to sign up. That was so not worth it. It probably cost us $100 in gas. But it is interesting now that I think that there's a lot of people that interacted with us in those early days, and they remember that. I think, again, it's something that you can't really measure and see the direct impact on. And when you're just like running the numbers, you're like, okay, that was not worth it. But it is really interesting. I think, especially we started in Toronto, and now like our level of just awareness and affinity in Toronto specifically, where we did a lot of those guerrilla kind of like efforts, is at a whole other level than any other city, just because I do think that that impacts people and they're like, oh my gosh, I signed up for the Gist when somebody made me in a park and now I see them everywhere kind of thing. So it's been, I do think some of that works. And I think that part of it is also just, like, I think you have to have a kind of work ethic and a level of, I am totally needing to be okay with humiliating myself. And like,
that is a big part of it.
Was something that was really hard for me. Like I'm not somebody who feels comfortable going up to a group of people in a park, but kind of just being like, we need people to sign up. So that's just what I'm going to do. It was definitely out of my comfort zone, but it's fun too. Looking back, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That's what we had to do at the time.
It is fun to look back on stories like that. I recently sat down with Jacie, who's the founder of and owner of the Savannah Bananas, who have obviously taken the world by storm. They're an absolute global phenomenon. And I was asking him about the early days when he took over and started to, they were a minor league baseball team that had nothing to do with what they're doing now. And I said, like, what were the early days like? He said, Andrew, the first 5 years, we personally called every fan that bought a ticket. Like they got their email confirmation, which is kind of what you come to expect. And then we actually made a phone call. I said, how many do you think you made? He said, I think we made about 500,000 phone calls the first 5 years. He says, you have to do the unscalable to scale. Yeah. Like that was his line. He says, you have to be willing to do these things that are unscalable. And I go back to what you said a few minutes ago, if you had analytics on it, it would say that you spent more in gas than worth the return that you got in new subscribers through that college campus guerrilla initiative. But like, it's hard to say, right? Because a lot of these things that you have to do to get the ball moving forward are probably on the surface, like in a business textbook, don't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Or the ROI is just not there. But then you look back and you're like, if we didn't do that, this might not be what it is today. Like I always like the expression, like which ingredient makes the cake taste good? Like if you had to take one ingredient out of a cake, which would you take out, right? That's a hard question to answer, right? And like when you look back on building the Gist, it's like, well, would we have not done the porta potty thing at the Eagles game? Would we have not done the gum in the park? Like you never know like which subscriber is going to, get that flywheel spinning or which group of subscribers. I think there's something really, really important to that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's a million moments. And, I think that it's such a relationship game too, where whether it's a subscriber that we randomly got to sign up because like one person at the porta potty line then got their friend to sign up and then they're the CMO of whatever company that we've been trying to work with and what have you. But even like just the people that we've met along the way. And I think that that's something I probably underestimated in that like it really does take a village and you have to have so many people supporting you and championing you in every single interaction. You need them to leave and be like, I need to, whether it's get the next person to sign up for the gist or like help, I want to help this company in some capacity. I think so many of those, yeah, there's thousands and thousands of those like little moments that I think help and just move the ball forward in different capacities that you can't quantify. And you never know that those conversations happened after that phone call or after that interaction with someone in a park. But I think that they do really matter. Again, it's so difficult to know. I think you also have to be okay with, we spent a whole weekend driving to all those college campuses and it maybe just like didn't work, and that's okay. I think that's also something that there's tons of stuff that we tried that probably had zero impact, negative impact maybe even, but just needing to move on from that, having just like such a ruthless like mentality around like we're only looking forward, I think is also really important because it's very easy to feel like, oh, we shouldn't have spent time on X, Y, and Z. Our time is so valuable. Like maybe we should have been doing this, and just always trying to be very forward looking and not kind of like dwell on some of those things too, I think is really important.
Yeah, I always say, like, I think something either works or you learn, right? Like you succeed or you learn. Like there's really no failure when you think about all these things that you're doing on these journeys, whether it's a journey to become an Olympic athlete, a Grammy winning musician, or building a business. I think everything that quote unquote doesn't work is just a data point and a learning that's going to help you along the way. And for listeners, I mean, this thing is far beyond what it was in the park when Jacie and her co-founders were handing out gum. In September 2024, that just reached 1 million email newsletter subscribers across platforms. The overall audience, more than 2 million, double the industry average in engagement rates. Why is the engagement and why is the loyalty with the gist content so high? Talk about that for a moment, Jacie.
Yeah, that again has been something that from day one, our ethos has never been to have like the biggest media company and the biggest audience, but to grow this entire space through these underserved fans. And so engagement has been so important to us. And I think the reality too in our kind of content media world is like anyone can buy a list of 1 million email subscribers tomorrow. Like that's not a difficult thing to do, but to have an open rate of 46% is a very difficult thing to do. And so we have grown very intentionally, which I will say, I just talked about how we were getting random people in the park to sign up. That probably doesn't seem like growing very intentionally, but that was also when we were at a phase where we just needed people to sign up to get feedback on just like what the concept was and if the content was even resonating. I would say once we were at a place where we knew there was a level of product market fit, it was like, okay, how do we grow, but grow with the right subscribers and the right audience? I think that our content is very relatable. We try to make it really as authentic as possible. And a big part of our value proposition to our audience, as well as to our brand partners, is that this is a hyper engaged, really valuable fan. And you can't get content like this anywhere else if you're a gister. And so just really growing intentionally and with those engagement rates in mind, like we also have super high retention. Like our gisters don't unsubscribe, which is very uncommon in the newsletter space, and just really keeping track of all of those metrics and making sure we're growing in the right ways has been really important to us. But that's also been a strategic decision. So another company in our position might decide, no, I want to just grow that kind of top line and have the largest audience possible, versus for us making sure that our gisters are just absolutely like obsessed with the brand and all of the content has been really important to us.
So about 10 days or so ago, the Gist announced plans to expand beyond sports, launch a new lifestyle newsletter. Take me through what goes into that decision, because that feels like, again, like a lot of thought and analysis goes into, hey, we want to be true to who we are, but we see an opportunity to add value to our community. How do you go through a decision like that? What's the early response been like?
Yeah. So we just launched the group chat. Our lifestyle newsletter comes out every Sunday. And you're right, there have been a lot of different factors that led to this launch. I would say one thing is that we're trying to get feedback from our audience and really gathering data on what they're most interested in all the time. Every single newsletter, we're analyzing the links and just generally what people are clicking on and engaging with. And then we also do a lot of direct user research. So we just did a whole exercise around like a ton of gister interviews to really dive into why they open our newsletter, why they consume our content on socials, why they love it, and also what they don't. And so, out of like a lot of those data points from a user and audience perspective, we were really seeing that there was just so much interest in that kind of lifestyle intersection with sports. And I think that is something that is not surprising, but is also like in some ways quite unique to an audience like ours because we have, as you can imagine, a lot of female fans. We also have an interesting mix of like really, really avid fans that maybe have been like a lifelong hockey, basketball, whatever kind of fan, but we also have a lot of fans that are newer to sports, whether that's women's sports or men's sports or what have you. And it's been interesting to see some of those triggers from a content perspective that deepen their fandom. And a lot of the time, those are more of those intersections with lifestyle content. And so some that could be wellness and fitness, that could be fashion, that could be travel, the list goes on, but some of that more relatable content that really supplements more of the sports news updates is something that really over the last, I think, year especially, but even before that, we saw that there was like something there. And then the other part is that we monetize through brand partnerships. And so where we can better serve some of those partners and there's going to be a natural fit as well for some of them to come in, and like that's kind of some of the criteria that we look at when we're launching something new is it needs to be provide new value to our audience and our gisters and then also to our brand partners. And so we've been really pleasantly surprised, I think, by the reception too. It's something that we knew we were getting a lot of interest in, but actually seeing so many gisters and then also again partners kind of reach out once we had the Forbes article come out being like, I need to learn more about this and I want to be involved in some way has been really cool. And I think also gratifying because we're like, we had a hunch, but again, you sometimes are like, are people going to be interested in this content? Is this exciting? You always have that little bit of doubt where you're like, are people going to like it? And so the reception so far has been really positive. And I think it's also important for us to just be constantly like launching new things and keeping our gisters really engaged through new kinds of content and products and what have you, and experiences as well. So that's been really cool to see that our gisters are really hungry for more from us.
What's something, Jacie, that you worried about really early on in this journey that you wish you hadn't spent so much time worried about?
That is a really good question. You know what? This is a little bit specific to the startup world, but in our early days, we went through a lot of like accelerator programs. I mentioned one with Comcast NBC, with Techstars. We do one with MLSE, who owns the Leafs and the Raptors in Toronto. And in those kinds of environments, and I think in a lot of tech startup environments, you're exposed to a lot of investors and tech investors who I think in our early days, again, had a lot of feedback and ideas of what they just could become. And in something that was in a lot of ways, like the criteria for like being more venture backed is having like tech at your core. And so whether that's building out an app or a completely new platform, but making sure we had a director of technology or a head engineer that was going to build something that would really, and from an investor's perspective, the calculation is like, you need to build that moat around you and tech allows you to do that. But I think sometimes that's also where these investors didn't see the business opportunity that was this media and content space and really hyper serving these underserved fans and the growth opportunity that could be. And so we got a lot of feedback and just so many conversations around like, what is the tech that we're going to build out? And now in hindsight, and you could kind of feel it at the time. Again, like sometimes that gut feeling is so interesting and like how much you listen to it or not in those moments. But we spent a lot of time discussing and trying to figure out, are we going to build this entirely new app or what have you? And I wouldn't say, to your point, that I regret that we went through those exercises. I think it was extremely valuable and we needed to go through that process in a lot of ways to get to where we are today and to in some ways have conviction around the product that we have today. But there's a lot of time, a lot of time spent in that and in having those conversations. And I think for a lot of startups, when you're talking and going down that more like traditional VC backed kind of path, that is the feedback that you get a lot of the time. And sometimes it's just not necessary. It's like over engineering what actually needs to be done.
Absolutely true. So, Jacie, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, 20 to 30 years from now, someone's writing an article about the gist. What do you want them to say about the gist?
You know what? I would love to get to a point where it's not like the gist, the da 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 da, and you have to have a sentence after that's like a sports media brand that's by and for underserved fans and da, da, da. I want it to just be like a household name where it's like somebody is mentioning the gist and everyone's like, yeah, we know what it is.
Somebody doesn't go get sneakers and say, I'm going to go get Nikes, a pair of athletic shoes, started in Oregon, right? Exactly. A household name.
Yes.
Household name.
I want the gist to be a household name in 20, 30 years, ideally 20.
I totally get it. What you are doing resonates so deeply with me, personally, professionally. When I set out on this journey to build Everybody Pulls a Tarp, I said, I have 2 young daughters. And I said, if they start listening to what dad is creating over the years, I want at least 50% of these conversations to be with successful women in sports, in business, in entertainment. And I've never, had to shoehorn someone onto the podcast to meet a metric, but it's every time I look, it's right around 51, 49, 50, 50. And I'm so proud of that, especially as a male podcaster and having a male leading a media platform, that 50% of these guests are really, really successful females. And it's just one of the many reasons why what you're doing it resonates with me so deeply. So congratulations on all the success. I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to dig into this all together.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. And yeah, like the impact that I hope the gist will have is exactly on your daughters. We need this next generation of girls to grow up knowing that there is a place for them, whether it's as a sports fan, whether it's the CEO of a team, whether it's on the field. Like she needs to see that, to know that it's something that she can do. And so, yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
As you know, there's so much work still to be done, but thanks to folks like yourself, that women's sports has come a long, long way in the last couple of years. So thank you, Jacie. Thank you for being a tarp puller. You are forever a part of the Everybody Pulls the Tarp family, all right? There's no question in my mind. You are a tarp puller, doing all the nitty gritty things out in the park, handing out gum, getting email subscribers, lining up people at the porta potties in Philadelphia. Thank you so much for being a tarp puller. All right, Jacie?
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
We'll talk again soon. Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Until next time, keep pulling the tarp.